The moment my grandson's hot water hit my skin, I knew something had changed between us forever. The searing pain was nothing compared to the realization that my own flesh and blood had deliberately hurt me, and no one in my family cared. "He's just a kid, Mom," my daughter Lisa said with an eye roll while I clutched my blistering arm. This wasn't the first time Alex had been cruel to me, but it was certainly the most dangerous. The doctor at the emergency room gave me a knowing look as he bandaged my degree burns. He had seen this before. Elder abuse. The word hung in the air unspoken. That night, as I packed my bags, I made sure to take the one thing they would truly miss, not me, but the five-generation family recipe journal that built Lisa's restaurant empire. The book she claimed contained her original creations. They dismissed my pain, but they would not ignore my absence once their precious recipes disappeared. I left their house in silence, taking with me something they would deeply regret losing. The aroma of ginger and star anise filled Lisa's kitchen as I stirred the pot of red braised pork belly. My daughter had always insisted I cook for her birthday gatherings. "No one makes it like you, Mom," she'd say, though I noticed she never mentioned my cooking when food critics came around to interview her about the restaurant's success. I wiped my brow with the back of my hand and checked the clock. Guests would arrive in an hour, and I still needed to finish the steamed fish and spring onion pancakes. At 65, I moved slower than I once did, but my hands remembered every fold, every subtle adjustment of heat and seasoning that had been passed down through 5 generations of women in my family. "Grandma, I need $20." Alex stood in the doorway, phone in hand, not bothering to look up from his screen. At 12, my grandson had his mother's sharp features, but none of the warmth I remembered from when Lisa was his age. "What for Alex?" I asked, continuing to stir. "Just give me the money," he said, finally glancing up with impatience in his eyes. "I'd like to know what it's for first," I replied gently. He scoffed. "Mom always gives me money when I ask." "Then perhaps you should ask your mother. She's busy getting ready." He took a step closer. "Come on, Grandma, don't be cheap." I set down my wooden spoon and turned to face him. "Alex, that's not a respectful way to speak to me or anyone." His face darkened. "Whatever, you're just the cook anyway." The comment stung, but it wasn't new. Lisa had never corrected him when he spoke to me this way. Last Christmas, he'd accidentally knocked over and shattered the jade figurine I'd brought from China 50 years ago. Lisa had laughed it off. "Kids break things, Mom. Don't be so materialistic." "I'm your grandmother, Alex," I said firmly, "not just the cook." He rolled his eyes and spotted my purse on the counter. Before I could stop him, he reached for it. "Alex, no." I stepped between him and my purse. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Alex grabbed the pot handle from the stove and swung it toward me. I raised my arm instinctively as scalding liquid splashed across my skin. The pain was immediate and blinding. I screamed and stumbled backward, clutching my right arm as blisters formed before my eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" Lisa rushed into the kitchen, elegant in her new dress, her hair perfectly styled for her party. He threw boiling water on me. I gasped through the pain. Lisa glanced at the pot on the floor, the water spreading across her expensive tiles, then at Alex, who had already adopted a defensive posture. "She wouldn't give me money," he muttered. "And she tried to grab me." "Is that true, Mom?" Lisa asked, her tone immediately shifting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He tried to take money from my purse. I stopped him and he threw hot water on me." Lisa sighed dramatically. "Alex, go to your room. Mom, let me see your arm." She examined it with clinical detachment while I bit my lip to keep from crying out. "It's just a little red. You're overreacting." "Lisa, it burns. I need to go to the hospital." By now, guests were arriving. I could hear voices in the living room. "Can't this wait until after the party?" Lisa whispered harshly. "You're making a scene over an accident." "This wasn't an accident," I insisted, tears welling in my eyes. Lisa's face hardened. "He's just a kid, Mom. Kids do impulsive things. Put some cold water on it and help me serve the appetizers." I stared at my daughter, suddenly seeing her as if for the first time. The little girl I'd raised, who once brought me dandelions and homemade cards, was now a woman who cared more about her party than her mother's pain. I need to go to the hospital, I repeated. Lisa exhaled sharply. Fine, I'll have David drive you. She called to her husband, then turned back to me with an accusatory look. The food, it's mostly done, I managed to say through gritted teeth. The fish just needs to steam for 8 minutes. She nodded curtly and walked out without another word of concern. The emergency room was crowded, but the sight of my arm, now a horrifying landscape of red and white blisters, moved me up the triage list. David dropped me off with a distracted pat on the shoulder and a promise that someone would pick me up later. Second-degree burns, the doctor said grimly after examining me. This is serious, Mrs. Chen. How did this happen? My grandson? I hesitated. He spilled hot water. The doctor's eyes narrowed slightly. Spilled. This pattern suggests the water was thrown, not spilled. I looked away, ashamed. Mrs. Chen, this isn't the first injury I've seen on you. 3 months ago, it was a broken wrist from a fall. Before that, bruised ribs from bumping into a counter. He paused. Is someone hurting you? My grandson is just difficult sometimes. He's 12, correct? The doctor frowned. And where are his parents when these incidents occur? My daughter says he's just being a kid. The doctor applied burn cream and carefully wrapped my arm. Mrs. Chen, what you're describing sounds like elder abuse. Even if the perpetrator is a child, the parents are responsible for stopping this behavior. He handed me a small card with resources printed on it. Do you have someone who can stay with you during your recovery? These burns will need regular care. My daughter. Someone else, perhaps? I thought about it and realized there was no one. After my husband died 10 years ago, I'd poured everything into helping Lisa with her restaurant and raising Alex. My friends had drifted away, busy with their own grandchildren or moved to retirement communities. Lisa arrived 3 hours later, clearly annoyed. Finally finished, the party's over. Everyone asked where you were. I have second-degree burns, I said, showing her my bandaged arm. The doctor says I'll need help changing the dressings. Lisa barely glanced at my injury. Mom, I have the restaurant to run. You know how busy I am. Your son did this to me, Lisa, on purpose. Oh, please, she scoffed. You're being dramatic. He's just a kid. Those words again, just a kid. As if that excused everything, Lisa drove me to my apartment in silence. She helped me inside with reluctant efficiency, promising to check in tomorrow. We both knew she wouldn't. After she left, I stood in my small living room, arm throbbing, and faced a truth I'd been avoiding for years. My daughter didn't respect me. My grandson had been taught that hurting me carried no consequences. Each incident had been worse than the last, and today could have been much worse if the water had hit my face instead of my arm. I moved slowly to my bedroom and pulled out a suitcase. I packed carefully, choosing only essential clothes and medications. Then I went to my bookshelf and removed the worn leather journal that contained 5 generations of family recipes, handwritten in Chinese and English. This book had built Lisa's reputation as an innovative chef with original creations. I traced my fingers over my grandmother's handwriting, remembering how she had taught me to make these dishes, sharing stories with each recipe. Lisa had never bothered to learn the stories. To her, the recipes were commodities, not heritage. I placed the journal in my bag, took one last look around my apartment, and closed the door behind me. I checked into the Parkview Motel, a modest place about 20 miles from Lisa's neighborhood. The woman at the front desk glanced at my bandaged arm with concern but didn't pry. I paid for 3 nights in cash, enough time to figure out my next steps. In my room, I carefully changed into night clothes, wincing as the fabric brushed against my burn. My phone had been buzzing persistently since I left the apartment. I finally checked it. 12 missed calls from Lisa and several text messages. Where are you? We need to talk. Mom, this is ridiculous. Call me back. Alex feels terrible. Come home so he can apologize. I knew that last one was a lie. Alex had never genuinely apologized for anything in his life. Lisa would make him mumble sorry while he stared at his shoes, then reward him with ice cream for his maturity in apologizing. I turned off my phone and took out the family recipe journal. Its leather cover was worn smooth by generations of hands. I opened to the first page, where my great-grandmother had written in careful Chinese characters. Food nourishes more than the body. It feeds the spirit, preserves memory, and binds family together. I remembered watching my grandmother cook as a child, how she would tell me stories about each dish. The red braised pork connected us to our ancestral village in Hunan. The winter melon soup was what she made when my grandfather was courting her. Each recipe had a purpose, a history, an emotion attached to it. Lisa had never cared about these stories. She'd simply extracted the techniques, modernized them slightly, and presented them as innovative fusion cuisine at her restaurant Golden Lotus. Food critics raved about her unique interpretations of classic Chinese flavors. Only I knew they weren't interpretations at all, but direct copies of recipes that had sustained our family through war, immigration, and building new lives in America. I fell asleep with the journal beside me, dreaming of my grandmother's kitchen. Morning brought fresh pain in my arm and 27 new messages from Lisa. I scrolled through them, noticing the progression from annoyance to worry to anger. The most recent ones caught my attention. Mom, where is my recipe book? I need it today. The Chronicle is sending a photographer tomorrow for the feature. I need those recipes. If you took it, this is completely unacceptable. She hadn't mentioned my burns once. The only thing she cared about was the recipe book, my family's legacy that she had claimed as her own. I turned my phone off again and ordered breakfast from a nearby diner. While I ate, I considered my options. I had enough savings to live modestly for a few months. My social security wouldn't start for another year. Lisa had been supplementing my income and paying my rent since I retired from teaching to help with Alex and the restaurant. The realization hit me hard. I had made myself utterly dependent on my daughter. In trying to be helpful, I had surrendered my autonomy, my identity. No wonder she and Alex treated me like an employee rather than family. On the third day, I finally called my old friend Alina. We had taught at the same elementary school for 20 years but had fallen out of touch after I retired to help Lisa. Maggie? Alina sounded surprised but pleased. It's been ages, how are you? Not great, I admitted and told her everything. Alina was silent for a long moment. You're being abused, Maggie, by both of them. The word still made me flinch. Alex is just a child who's learning that hurting others has no consequences, and Lisa is an adult who should know better. Alina's voice was firm. Where are you staying now? I told her about the motel. That's ridiculous. I have a spare room. You're coming to stay with me until you figure things out. I started to protest, but Alina cut me off. True friends show up when needed. I'm needed now. That afternoon, Alina picked me up from the motel. Her condo was in a quiet community on the other side of town, far from Lisa's upscale neighborhood. The spare room was small but sunny, with a desk by the window overlooking a community garden. Make yourself at home, Alina said. I mean it. Stay as long as you need. That night, we sat on her balcony drinking tea. Alina had always been direct, and time hadn't softened that quality. You've enabled them, you know, she said, both of them. I was trying to help, I replied defensively. By letting Lisa take credit for your family recipes, by letting Alex mistreat you without consequences. I stared into my tea. I didn't want to cause problems. Maggie, there's a difference between causing problems and allowing yourself to be respected. You've erased yourself trying to make Lisa's life easier. She reached for my hand. What about your life? The question lingered in my mind for days afterward. What about my life? I had spent the last decade defining myself only in relation to Lisa and Alex, grandmother, cook, helper. I had stopped being Maggie Chen, a woman with her own desires and dignity. A week after moving in with Alina, I was watching the local morning news when Lisa appeared on screen. She was being interviewed about the upcoming feature in the Chronicle. The reporter asked about her signature dish, red braised pork with 5 spice. It's a recipe I developed after years of experimentation, Lisa said smoothly. Finding the right balance of sweet and savory, traditional and modern. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Even now she was lying, the interview shifted. I understand you're also looking for a family heirloom that was recently taken from your home. Lisa's expression became pained. Yes, a very special recipe journal that's been in our family for generations. It has tremendous sentimental value. If anyone has seen it, please contact Golden Lotus Restaurant. Do you have any idea who might have taken it? The reporter asked. Lisa hesitated, and I could see her calculating how much to reveal. We have some leads. It's a private family matter. She hadn't mentioned me. She was too embarrassed to admit that her own mother had walked away. Or perhaps she was worried about how it would look if people knew about Alex's behavior. Alina, watching beside me, snorted. Sentimental value? That book is her meal ticket, and she knows it. Later that day, Alina brought home a flyer from the community center where she volunteered. They're looking for cooking instructors for their summer program. Thought you might be interested. I scanned the flyer. The community center offered classes for seniors, immigrants, and low-income families. The pay was modest, but it was something. I don't know, I said hesitantly. I'm not a professional chef, Alina laughed. Honey, you've been cooking restaurant-quality food for decades, plus you have stories that go with each dish. People love that authentic connection. I looked at the flyer again. Authentic family cooking, it said. Share your cultural heritage through food. That evening, I opened the family recipe journal and began to really read it. Not just the ingredients and techniques, but the margins where my mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother had written notes about their lives, the times when each dish was served, the people who had gathered around their tables. This wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was a family history, a legacy of women who had nourished their loved ones through war, migration, poverty, and prosperity. I had been the keeper of this legacy, and I had allowed Lisa to commodify it without understanding its true value. I called the number on the flyer and scheduled an interview for the following week. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother again. We were in her kitchen making dumplings together. The food is not the treasure, she told me in Chinese. The knowing is the treasure, the remembering. When I woke, I knew what I needed to do. If Lisa thought the recipes were the valuable part, she had missed the point entirely. The stories, the context, the love that went into each dish, that was the true inheritance. And that was something I could share with many more people than just my daughter and grandson. The community center was housed in a converted school building, with bright murals painted on its exterior walls. I arrived early for my interview, the recipe journal tucked safely in my bag. My arm was healing slowly, the worst of the blisters now forming new pink skin underneath. Sandra Kim, the program director, was a brisk woman in her 40s with kind eyes. So you want to teach cooking classes, she said, reviewing my application. You don't have professional experience? Not in a restaurant, I admitted. But I've been cooking family recipes for over 50 years. My daughter runs Golden Lotus Restaurant downtown. Sandra's eyebrows rose. Lisa Chen is your daughter. I love that place. I smiled tightly. The recipes are family heirlooms. I can teach authentic Chinese home cooking, the kind passed down through generations. Each dish has a story behind it. Sandra seemed intrigued. Our community has been asking for more cultural cooking classes. We have many immigrant families who want to connect with their heritage, and others who want to learn about different traditions. I opened the recipe journal and showed her some of the handwritten pages. My grandmother wrote these during the Japanese occupation. She had to be creative with limited ingredients. Sandra carefully turned the pages. This is a treasure, Mrs. Chen. I think our participants would appreciate not just learning recipes, but understanding their context and history. By the end of the interview, I was scheduled to teach 2 classes per week: authentic family cooking, Chinese traditions, and cooking with stories, heritage recipes. My first class had 8 participants, 3 elderly Chinese women who wanted to reconnect with traditional cooking, 2 young mothers interested in teaching their children about their heritage, and 3 non-Chinese people eager to learn authentic techniques. I began by showing them the recipe journal. This book contains 5 generations of my family's history. Today we'll make dumplings, but we're not just making food. We're continuing a tradition that has sustained my family through war, immigration, and building new lives. As we mixed dough and chopped fillings, I told them about my grandmother teaching me to fold dumplings when I was 6 years old. She said the shape of the dumpling represented wealth, and each fold was a wish for prosperity. The class listened intently, their hands working the dough as I demonstrated. By the end of the session, everyone had created their own dumplings, imperfect but made with care. Next week, we'll make red braised pork belly and learn why this dish was served at every important family gathering, I told them. One of the young mothers approached me afterward. My grandmother used to make dumplings, but she died before teaching me. Thank you for sharing not just the recipe, but the meaning behind it. I returned to Aliner's condo feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I had been valued for my knowledge and experience, not just for my utility. My classes quickly became popular. By the third week, both sessions were full with a waiting list. I began adding extra classes, delving deeper into regional specialties and festival foods. For each dish, I shared the stories from my family, the historical context, the symbolism of ingredients. Students started bringing their own family recipes to share, creating a community archive of culinary traditions. They posted photos of their creations on social media, always with the hashtag #AuthenticFamilyCooking and often with the stories I had shared. One evening, Alina showed me an article on her tablet. You should see this, she said. It was a review of Golden Lotus in a local food blog. While the restaurant still serves excellent food, something seems to have changed. The signature dishes lack the depth and complexity they once had. Perhaps Chef Chen is experimenting with new techniques, but loyal customers might find themselves missing the original versions. I hadn't intended this outcome, but I wasn't surprised. Lisa had never fully understood the subtle balance of flavors in the family recipes. She had watched me cook, but hadn't absorbed the intuitive adjustments, the knowing when a dish needed a touch more vinegar or a slightly longer braise. More reviews followed in a similar vein. Golden Lotus was still popular, but regulars noticed something different. Meanwhile, my classes continued to grow, and students began hosting dinner parties featuring my recipes, complete with the stories behind each dish. I was teaching a class on traditional festival sweets when I felt a shift in the room's energy. Looking up from the lotus seed paste I was demonstrating how to prepare, I saw Lisa standing in the doorway, her face a mask of controlled anger. I continued teaching, guiding my students through the process of filling and shaping moon cakes. Only when they were safely in the oven did I approach my daughter. We need to talk, she said, her voice tight. Privately, I led her to a small office Sandra had let me use for preparation. My recipe journal sat on the desk, its pages marked with sticky notes for future classes. Lisa lunged for it immediately. I moved faster despite my age blocking her reach. That's mine, she hissed. You stole it. This journal has been passed down through my family for 5 generations, I said calmly. It belongs to me, not to you. I need it for the restaurant, you know that. Her voice rose. Do you have any idea what you've done? Critics are saying my food has changed. Regulars are complaining, all because you took the recipes and disappeared. I didn't disappear, Lisa. I left after your son deliberately burned me and you dismissed it as nothing. It was an accident, she insisted automatically. It was not an accident, I said firmly. And it was not the first time Alex has hurt me with your knowledge. You've taught him that I don't matter, that hurting me has no consequences. This is ridiculous. You're ruining everything over a little accident. I slowly rolled up my sleeve, revealing the still healing burn that covered most of my forearm. Some areas were now shiny pink, others still raw and tender. This is not little Lisa. This is a degree burn that could have permanently disabled me if it had hit elsewhere. Your son did this on purpose, and you protected him instead of me. My students had finished cleaning their workstations and were now watching us through the office's glass window. I saw concern on their faces and something else, recognition. Many of them had their own stories of family conflicts, of traditions disrespected, of elders dismissed. You're embarrassing yourself, Lisa said, lowering her voice. Teaching cooking classes to amateurs when your recipes could be featured in the Chronicle. They're not my recipes to keep, I replied. They're my heritage to share, something you never understood. Lisa's face hardened. I'll take legal action if I have to. That book is vital to my business. A business built on claiming my family's recipes as your own creations, she flinched slightly. I've adapted them, made them modern. You've simplified them and taken shortcuts. That's why your food isn't the same without me in the kitchen. I met her gaze steadily. Go ahead and take legal action, Lisa. I have nothing to hide. She stormed out, brushing past my students without acknowledgement. I returned to the class, apologizing for the interruption. Was that Lisa Chen from Golden Lotus? One student asked. I nodded, unsure how much to share. An elderly Chinese woman patted my hand. Family business should stay private, but know that we are here for you, Teacher Chen. That simple acknowledgement of respect, Teacher Chen, brought tears to my eyes. In my daughter's world, I had been just the cook, the convenient childcare, the background support. Here I was valued for my knowledge and experience. After class, Sandra approached me. Everything okay? That looked intense. I explained briefly about Lisa's visit and threats of legal action. Sandra considered this thoughtfully. You know, we've been looking for someone to expand our cultural cooking program full-time. The position includes a small stipend and housing assistance in the community center's residential wing. I stared at her in surprise. You'd offer me a job at my age? Age is exactly why we want you, Mrs. Chen. You have knowledge that's being lost in our community. And from what I've seen, you're an excellent teacher. That evening, I received an email notification from Lisa. It was an eviction notice for my apartment. She had been paying the rent all these years, something I'd accepted as her contribution since I had been helping with Alex and the restaurant. Now she was using it as leverage. I showed the notice to a leaner who snorted in disgust. Classic manipulation. She thinks without a home you'll come crawling back. I thought about Sandra's offer. A new purpose, a new home, a community that valued what I had to give. I'm not going back, I said firmly. Not this time. I accepted Sandra's offer the next day. The community center's residential wing was simple but comfortable. A studio apartment with a small kitchen, perfect for a woman of my age living alone. The center's director helped me gather my remaining belongings from my old apartment before Lisa's eviction deadline. My new home felt liberating. For the first time in years, I wasn't dependent on my daughter's financial support or living under obligations disguised as generosity. I expanded my classes to include special workshops on festival cooking and regional cuisines, sharing not just recipes but the cultural context that made them meaningful. 3 weeks after Lisa's confrontation at the community center, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside were legal documents. Lisa was suing me for theft of intellectual property, claiming the recipe journal as a business asset of Golden Lotus Restaurant. The leaner, who had come to help me settle in, read over the documents with narrowed eyes. This is outrageous. She's claiming your family heirloom belongs to her business. I felt strangely calm. She thinks this will force me to give up. She's never understood what truly matters. We consulted with a legal aid attorney who specialized in elder issues. After reviewing the documents and hearing my story, he leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. Mrs. Chen, this case has serious flaws. First, there's no documentation that you ever transferred ownership of the journal to your daughter or her business. Second, she's publicly claimed these recipes as her own original creations, which contradicts her current claim that they're family recipes belonging to the restaurant. What should I do? I asked. Respond to the suit, definitely. And I suggest we counter with evidence of the journal's provenance as a family heirloom. Do you have any elder relatives who could testify about the journal's history? I thought about my cousin Wei, who had immigrated with me from Taiwan 60 years ago, and my Aunt Lin, now 92, who had known my grandmother. They would remember the journal. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In that time, I continued teaching while gathering documentation and statements from family members. My Aunt Lin sent a notarized letter describing how she had watched my grandmother write in the journal during the Japanese occupation. Cousin Wei provided photographs from the 1970s showing me cooking from the journal in my first American apartment. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a simple blue kippah that had belonged to my mother. The leaner accompanied me to the courthouse, where Lisa was already waiting with her attorney, a polished man in an expensive suit. Alex was nowhere to be seen. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and keen eyes, reviewed the documents before addressing us. This is an unusual case, she began. Ms. Chen claims this recipe journal is a business asset of Golden Lotus Restaurant, while Mrs. Chen claims it's a family heirloom that was never transferred to the business. Let's hear from both sides. Lisa's attorney presented first, arguing that I had allowed the recipes to be used commercially for years, essentially transferring ownership through use. He presented menus from Golden Lotus featuring the dishes. When my turn came, I spoke directly to the judge. Your Honor, this journal contains 5 generations of my family's history. My great-grandmother began it during difficult times in China. My grandmother continued it during the Japanese occupation. My mother added to it as we fled to Taiwan. I brought it with me to America 60 years ago. I presented Aunt Lynn's letter and Cousin Wei's photographs, along with statements from 3 other elderly relatives who confirmed the journal's history. These recipes were never given to Golden Lotus Restaurant, I explained. I allowed my daughter to use them because I wanted to support her business, but I never transferred ownership of our family's heritage. The judge turned to Lisa. Ms. Chen, you've marketed these recipes as your original creations. Is that correct? Lisa shifted uncomfortably. I've adapted and modernized traditional recipes. But in interviews, you've claimed to have developed these recipes yourself through experimentation. I have several such interviews here. The judge held up printouts of articles. You can't claim intellectual property rights to something you've publicly represented as your own original work and now claim is a family recipe. Lisa's attorney whispered urgently to her. She leaned forward. Your Honor, my mother has been central to our restaurant's success. When she left without warning, taking our recipe collection, it placed our business in jeopardy. Did Mrs. Chen ever sign any agreement regarding these recipes? Not formally, but there was an understanding. The judge looked skeptical. An understanding is not a legal transfer of property. After considering all the evidence, the judge ruled in my favor. This journal clearly belongs to Mrs. Chen as a family heirloom. While she allowed the recipes to be used commercially, she never transferred ownership. Furthermore, Golden Lotus Restaurant has represented these recipes as original creations, not family recipes, in its marketing. The lawsuit is dismissed. Relief washed over me. The journal remained where it belonged in my possession to share as I saw fit. As we left the courtroom, Lisa confronted me in the hallway. Are you happy now? Do you have any idea what you've done to the restaurant, to our reputation? I never wanted to hurt your business, Lisa. I just wanted to be treated with respect. This is about Alex, isn't it? You're punishing him for an accident. Before I could respond, Alex emerged from around the corner. He must have been waiting nearby during the hearing. At 12, he was tall for his age, gangly with adolescence, but his expression was no longer the entitled sneer I was accustomed to. He looked uncertain, almost afraid. It wasn't an accident, he said quietly. Lisa whirled to face him. What did you say? I did it on purpose, Alex admitted, not meeting her eyes. I was mad she wouldn't give me money. The hallway fell silent. Lisa stared at her son as if seeing him for the first time. Alex, why would you? She finally managed to say. He shrugged, uncomfortable under her gaze. You always said Grandma was just being dramatic, that nothing was a big deal. I watched the realization dawn on my daughter's face. Her dismissal of my feelings, her casual enabling of Alex's behavior had created this situation. For years, she had taught him that disrespecting me carried no consequences. Alex, go wait by the elevator, she said quietly. After he left, Lisa turned to me. Her composure had cracked, revealing genuine distress. I didn't know. I really thought he was just being a kid. Children learn what we teach them, Lisa. You taught him I didn't matter. She flinched at the truth in my words. I never meant for him to hurt you, but you made it clear that hurting me was acceptable. I gestured to my arm, now mostly healed but still bearing the marks of that day. This wasn't the first time, just the worst. Lisa looked down at the courthouse floor. I've scheduled him for therapy. After you left, things got worse. He became more defiant, more angry. The therapist says he needs clear boundaries. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It had taken my absence for Lisa to see what had been happening all along. The restaurant, she said after a moment. It's struggling without your recipes. Customers can tell something's different. The recipes aren't the problem, Lisa. You never learned the heart behind them, the small adjustments, the patience required. You wanted the results without understanding the process. She looked up, a flicker of the little girl I had raised visible in her eyes. Could you teach me, not for the restaurant, for me, for us? I considered her request carefully. There had been too much hurt, too easily dismissed to simply return to how things were. I'm teaching classes at the community center now, I said finally. You're welcome to attend like any other student. Lisa nodded slowly, accepting this boundary. As she turned to leave, I added, and Lisa, I expect a proper apology from Alex. Not because you made him give one, but because he understands what he did was wrong. She nodded again and walked toward the elevator where her son waited. Alina, who had witnessed the entire exchange, squeezed my hand. You did it, Maggie. You stood up for yourself. I watched my daughter and grandson enter the elevator, both subdued, both facing consequences perhaps for the first time. It's not about winning, I said quietly. It's about being valued. 2 weeks after the courthouse confrontation, I received an unexpected email from a publisher specializing in culinary books. They had heard about my cooking classes through social media posts from my students and were interested in publishing a cookbook based on my family recipes and their stories. We're particularly interested in the cultural and historical context you provide, the editor wrote. Cookbooks that tell a story are increasingly popular, and your five-generation journal represents a unique culinary journey through modern Chinese history. I read the email several times, hardly believing it was real. My students had been encouraging me to write down the stories I shared in class, but I never imagined a professional publisher would be interested. I showed the email to Sandra during our weekly program meeting. This is wonderful, Maggie, she said, genuinely excited for me. Your classes have been our most popular offerings. People are connecting with the way you teach cooking as cultural heritage, not just food preparation. I never thought of myself as an author, I admitted. You've been authoring your family's story through food for decades, Sandra replied. Now you have the chance to preserve it for future generations. I scheduled a meeting with the publisher for the following week. Meanwhile, my classes continued to grow. I had started teaching a special workshop for parents and children, helping them create their own family recipe journals together. A recipe is more than instructions, I told them. It's a memory you can taste. Write down who taught it to you when you make it, what it means to your family. That's the true legacy. One morning, I received a handwritten letter with no return address. The handwriting was childish but careful. Dear Grandma, it began. I'm sorry I hurt you. I was really mad that day, but that's no excuse. My therapist is helping me understand my anger better. I miss your cooking. Dad says Mom's food isn't the same anymore. I hope your arm is better. From Alex. The letter wasn't eloquent, but it felt sincere, not the forced apology Lisa would have demanded in the past. I tucked it carefully into my journal, not yet ready to respond, but appreciating the first genuine acknowledgement from my grandson. Alina convinced me to visit Golden Lotus one evening. Just to see, she said. You don't have to talk to Lisa. We went early on a Tuesday when the restaurant would be quieter. From our table near the back, I could see Lisa moving between the kitchen and dining room, looking more harried than I remembered. The restaurant was less than half full, unusual for a place that once required reservations weeks in advance. We ordered several dishes, including the red braised pork belly that had been my grandmother's signature recipe. When it arrived, I took a small bite and immediately recognized the difference. The flavors were familiar but somehow flat, missing the depth that comes from patience and precision. It's close, I told Alina, but she's rushing it. The pork needs to simmer longer and she's using too much sugar, not enough star anise. I noticed Lisa watching us from the doorway to the kitchen. Our eyes met briefly before she disappeared back inside. We finished our meal without further interaction. On the drive home, Alina asked, "Do you miss it, working there?" I considered the question carefully. I miss cooking with purpose, knowing the food connects people to each other and to their heritage, but I don't miss being taken for granted. You're still cooking with purpose, Alina pointed out. Maybe more purpose than before. You're teaching dozens of people to value their culinary traditions. She was right. My classes had grown into something larger than I had anticipated. Students were forming cooking groups outside of class, sharing their own family recipes, creating a community around the preservation of food heritage. Some had even begun documenting the recipes and stories of elderly relatives, creating their own family journals. The meeting with the publisher went well. They envisioned a cookbook that would include not just recipes but photographs of the original journal pages, my family's history, and the cultural significance of each dish. "We want to capture your voice," the editor explained. "The way you teach about food as culture, as history, as family connection." We began working on the book immediately. As I went through the journal selecting recipes to include, I found myself reconnecting with my own history, remembering my grandmother's hands guiding mine as I learned to pleat dumplings, my mother's voice explaining why we always served fish at New Year. One afternoon, as I was photographing pages from the journal for the book, Sandra appeared at my door with a small package. "This was delivered for you at the front desk," she said. Inside was a handcrafted wooden recipe stand, beautifully carved with lotus flowers. There was no note, but I recognized Lisa's husband David's handiwork. He had always enjoyed woodworking as a hobby. The gesture touched me, though I wasn't ready to reach out to Lisa yet. The wound of years of dismissal and Alex's final act of violence was still healing, like my arm. The physical injury mostly recovered, but the memory of pain still present. My cooking classes continued to evolve. Students began bringing elderly family members to share their own culinary memories, creating an informal oral history project. We recorded their stories, documenting recipes that might otherwise be lost when they passed. "You've started something important here," Sandra told me after one such session. "This isn't just about cooking anymore. It's about preserving cultural heritage." The Community Food Heritage Project became official, with funding from a local cultural organization. We began creating a digital archive of recipes and food stories from diverse immigrant communities, with my classes as the centerpiece. My publisher was excited about the project, suggesting we expand the cookbook concept to include some of these additional stories. Your family's journey could be the framework, with other families' stories woven throughout. A tapestry of culinary heritage. 6 months after leaving Lisa's house, my life had transformed. I had purpose, community, and respect. My cookbook was taking shape, the Food Heritage Project was thriving, and my apartment at the community center had become a true home. One evening, while preparing materials for the next day's class, I heard a hesitant knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Lisa standing there, looking uncertain. "Mom," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I invited her in, offering tea as she sat nervously on my small sofa. The apartment was modest compared to her home, but filled with warmth, student thank you cards on the refrigerator, cooking implements hanging on hooks, family photographs on the walls. "Your classes are famous now," Lisa said, attempting to break the ice. "Everyone's talking about them." "I'm just sharing what I know," I replied, setting tea in front of her. Lisa took a deep breath. "I tried making grandmother's red braised pork again yesterday. It wasn't right." "Nothing I've cooked has been right since you left." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I realized something," she said, staring into her tea. "I've been cooking the recipes but missing the heart of them. I never learned the why, only the how." It was the most honest thing Lisa had said to me in years. I felt something shift between us, not forgiveness exactly, but an opening. "Alex is doing better," she continued. "The therapy is helping. He's learning to control his anger, to understand where it comes from." She looked up at me. "I'm in therapy too, learning about boundaries, about respecting others." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. I saw your cookbook announcement in the paper, Lisa said. Congratulations. Thank you, she hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been on her mind. Will you include the Golden Lotus recipes? They're not Golden Lotus recipes, Lisa. They're our family recipes. And yes, they'll be in the book with the stories behind them. She nodded, accepting this. I understand now. I should have learned the stories too. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Would you consider visiting the restaurant again, not to work, just to talk? Maybe you could help me understand what I'm missing in the cooking. I considered her request carefully. I think that might be possible, eventually. After she left, I returned to my preparation for the next day's class. The theme was cooking through hardship, recipes that had sustained my family during war and displacement. I ran my fingers over my grandmother's handwriting, remembering her voice. When everything else is taken from you, knowing how to nourish yourself and others is power. I had reclaimed that power not by hoarding my knowledge but by sharing it widely. In doing so, I had found a community that valued what I had to offer, my experience, my heritage, my stories. For the first time in many years, I felt truly seen. 6 months passed quickly. My cookbook, 5 Generations, A Family's Journey Through Food, was in the final stages of editing. The publisher had sent me preliminary layouts with my family recipes beautifully photographed alongside scanned pages from the original journal. They had captured exactly what I'd hoped for, not just a collection of recipes, but a preserved heritage. My apartment at the community center had become truly mine. Students often brought small gifts, a plant, a special spice, a handcrafted kitchen tool, until the space reflected the community we'd built together. The walls displayed photographs of cooking classes, student gatherings, and elderly community members sharing their food memories for our heritage project. On a quiet Sunday morning, I received a package. Inside was a handcrafted wooden stand for my recipe journal, intricately carved with lotus flowers and bamboo. A small card read simply, "For the real chef in the family. Love, Lisa." I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, appreciating the thoughtfulness of the gift. Lisa and I had been cautiously rebuilding our relationship over the past months. She had visited my classes a few times, sitting quietly in the back, observing how I taught not just techniques but the cultural and historical context of each dish. I had visited Golden Lotus twice, not to cook, but to talk with Lisa about the recipes. I showed her the small adjustments that made the difference, how the red braised pork needed to simmer longer, how the proportions of spices created depth of flavor, how patience was as important an ingredient as anything tangible. She listened in a way she never had before, taking notes, asking questions about why certain steps mattered. I never understood, she admitted during one visit. I thought cooking was just about ingredients and techniques. I didn't realize how much history and intention went into each dish. I was placing the journal on its newsstand when my phone rang. It was Lisa. "Mom, are you free this afternoon? I'd like to come by. There's something I want to ask you." I agreed, curious about her request. Since our courthouse confrontation and gradual reconciliation, Lisa had been respectful of my boundaries, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. She arrived carrying a small bag and looking nervous in a way I rarely saw her. We sat at my small kitchen table and I poured tea for both of us. "Alex has a school project," she began. "About family heritage. He wants to interview you about growing up in Taiwan, about coming to America." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "And you're comfortable with that?" "It was his idea," Lisa said. "His therapist suggested connecting with family history might help him develop empathy. But only if you're willing." I considered the request. Alex and I had exchanged a few letters since his apology, but we hadn't spent time together. The thought of sharing my immigration story with him was appealing. Perhaps he could understand where he came from, the struggles that had made his comfortable life possible. "I would be willing," I said finally. "But not yet. Let's give it a little more time." Lisa nodded, accepting my decision. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a new, empty journal bound in green leather. "I wanted to ask something else," she said, pushing the journal toward me. "Would you teach me the stories behind the recipes? Not for the restaurant, for me, for our family. The request surprised me. After years of Lisa treating my cooking as merely useful, never meaningful, this acknowledgement of the deeper value was unexpected. I brought this to take notes, she continued, gesturing to the blank journal. I want to learn everything you know, not just how to make the dishes, but why we make them, what they meant to grandmother, to you. I touched the empty journal, thinking of the generations of women in my family who had recorded not just recipes, but pieces of their lives in such books. I've been teaching a class on Thursday evenings, I said. Advanced techniques and family stories. You could join. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. You'd let me come to your class. You'd be a student like anyone else, I clarified. There to learn, not to take, she nodded quickly. I understand, thank you. The following Thursday, Lisa arrived early for class, the green journal in hand. My regular students greeted her with curious glances. Many knew she was my daughter and own Golden Lotus. Today we're making grandmother's 8-treasure rice, I announced to the class. This dish was served only on special occasions because the dried fruits and nuts were expensive luxuries. As I demonstrated the technique for preparing the sticky rice and arranging the treasures, jujubes, candied winter melon, dried apricots, I shared the story of my grandmother making this dish during the Lunar New Year of 1945, when war had made such ingredients nearly impossible to find. She traded a silver hairpin for 2 jujubes and a handful of lotus seeds, I told them. When I asked why she would trade something valuable for just a little food, she said, continuing our traditions during hard times is how we remember who we are. I noticed Lisa writing intently in her journal, recording not just the recipe but the story. For the first time, she was seeing our family's food as more than ingredients and techniques. She was recognizing it as resistance, as preservation of identity through generations of hardship. After class, several students stayed to share their own family food stories. An elderly Vietnamese woman described making rice paper by hand during war years. A young Mexican-American man talked about his grandfather's mole recipe that contained 27 ingredients, each with symbolic meaning. Lisa listened to these stories with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that showed she was beginning to understand what I had been teaching all along. Food carries memory, history, and identity. As the others left, Lisa lingered, helping me clean up the teaching kitchen. I never knew that story about great-grandmother's hairpin, she said. All these years I've been cooking her recipes without knowing who she really was. That's why the journal is so precious, I replied. It's not just the recipes, it's our history. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. Would you tell me more about her, about Taiwan, about when you first came to America? Something in her request reminded me of when she was a little girl, always asking for stories at bedtime. Before ambition and success had hardened her, before she began seeing me as merely useful rather than wise. Next week, I promised. Bring your journal. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Lisa attended my Thursday class, then stayed afterward for private conversations about our family history. I shared stories about my grandmother hiding the recipe journal during the Japanese occupation, about my mother adding her own recipes during our years in Taiwan, about my early struggles cooking Chinese food in America when many ingredients were unavailable. Lisa recorded everything in her green journal, asking thoughtful questions, discovering her heritage through the language of food. Sometimes she would bring ingredients to my apartment and we would cook together, just the two of us, the way we had when she was young. One evening, as we made dumplings side by side, Lisa asked, "Why didn't you teach me all this before?" I considered her question carefully. "You weren't ready to hear it. You wanted the recipes, not the stories." She nodded slowly. I missed so much by rushing. On a sunny Saturday 6 months after Lisa had first joined my class, I held a special cooking demonstration for the community center's annual cultural festival. The room was packed with students, community members, and local food writers covering the event for various publications. I had chosen to demonstrate my grandmother's recipe for survival congee, a simple rice porridge that had sustained our family through war and displacement. made special with whatever ingredients could be found. This dish represents resilience, I explained to the audience. The ability to create nourishment from almost nothing, to find comfort in the simplest foods. As I spoke, I noticed Lisa entering the room with Alex. This was unexpected. We had scheduled his first visit for the following week. They found seats near the back, and I continued my demonstration, explaining how my grandmother would flavor the congee with tiny amounts of preserved vegetables when fresh ones weren't available. After the demonstration, as people enjoyed samples of the finished dish, Lisa and Alex approached my table. At 13, Alex was growing taller, his face losing some of its childish roundness. He looked nervous, clutching a folder to his chest. "I wanted to show you my project," he said quietly. "About our family history." He opened the folder to reveal a carefully constructed family tree. At the top was a photograph of my grandmother in Taiwan, copied from one I had shared with Lisa. Below were photographs of each generation, including one of me teaching at the community center. "Mom's been telling me about great-great-grandmother and how she saved the recipe book during the war," Alex said. "I didn't know our family had been through so much." I studied the project, touched by the care he had taken with it. At the bottom of the page, he had written in careful characters, "Food connects us to our past and to each other." "This is very thoughtful, Alex," I said. "You've done a good job capturing our family's journey." He shifted nervously. "Could you maybe tell me more sometime, about when you first came to America?" The request echoed his mother's from months before. I looked at Lisa, who gave me an encouraging nod. "I would like that," I replied. After the festival ended, Lisa, Alex, and I went to my apartment. I made tea while Alex set up his project on my small table. Lisa took out her green journal, now filled with recipes and stories. "I've been practicing grandmother's dumplings," she said. "Would you check my technique sometime?" "Next Thursday," I promised. "Bring the ingredients to class." As we sat together, I brought out the family recipe journal and showed Alex some of its oldest pages. "Your great-great-grandmother began this during a terrible war," I explained. "She was afraid our family's recipes would be lost, so she wrote down everything she could remember. Not just how to make the dishes, but why they mattered when they were served, what they meant to our people." Alex listened with genuine interest. "And now you're doing the same thing with your students?" I nodded. "Some traditions are too important to lose." Lisa opened her green journal and began making notes as I spoke. I watched her record my words, adding her own thoughts in the margins, just as my grandmother and I had done in the original journal. In that moment, I saw the circle completing itself. The recipes and stories that had traveled from China to Taiwan to America were continuing their journey, not just through blood but through a wider community. The knowledge I had feared would be lost was now spreading, taking root in new soil. "Sometimes it takes losing something precious to understand what's truly valuable," I said, watching Lisa write in her journal. "The recipes were never mine to keep, they were mine to share." Alex looked up from the old journal pages. "I'm sorry I hurt you, Grandma. I didn't understand what this meant to you." "I know," I said softly. "But now you're learning." As the afternoon sun filled my small apartment with golden light, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The path that had brought me here, from my daughter's kitchen to a motel room to the community center, had been painful but necessary. By taking the recipe journal with me, I had not only preserved my own dignity but had uncovered a greater purpose, keeping alive the wisdom of generations through the universal language of food. Lisa looked up from her writing, her expression thoughtful. "Mom, would you help me host a special dinner at Golden Lotus? Not the regular menu, but a heritage dinner with each dish served with its story." "I think that would be wonderful," I replied, imagining the possibilities. "We could invite some of my students to share their family dishes too." "A celebration of food heritage," Lisa said, warming to the idea, "with the real stories behind each recipe." As we continued planning, sharing ideas across 3 generations, I recognized that what had begun as an act of self-preservation, leaving with the family recipe journal, had transformed into something much larger. A reclamation of heritage, an expansion of family, a community of shared stories. The wooden recipe stand Lisa had given me held the journal open to my grandmother's recipe for 8 treasure rice. Tomorrow, I would teach Lisa and my students the proper technique for arranging the fruits, the patience required for steaming the sticky rice to perfection. I would share my grandmother's story of trading her silver hairpin for ingredients during wartime. And I would watch as they added their own stories to the legacy, extending our family's tradition beyond blood, beyond borders, into a future where these precious things would not be lost but multiplied, like the sharing of bread or the passing of fire from torch to torch, illuminating the path forward.